Breaking news today. On his upcoming trip to Israel, Blinken says he will discuss ways to reduce civilian casualties. This is what you need to understand. On his way to high-level talks in Israel on Thursday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said he would prioritize reducing civilian casualties in Gaza. The United States is committed to minimizing harm to men, women, and children in Gaza, he said, and that's what they'll be discussing at the meeting. In light of the growing international outcry over the scale of humanitarian suffering in the Hamas-run enclave, U.S. President Joe Biden, Blinken, and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin have all issued increasingly dire warnings to Israel. On Wednesday, Biden, who has supported Israel wholeheartedly but expressed growing concern about the situation in Gaza, called for a humanitarian pause to allow aid to reach civilians and assist in the release of hostages. Here's some more information that's relevant. Intense flares. The skies of northern Gaza were illuminated by flares and explosions during an intense bombardment Thursday night. The Israeli military previously claimed to be deepening operations in the area around Gaza City. The head of the main UN agency in Gaza has stated that the territory's fuel supplies are completely depleted, and that all remaining public services in Gaza have completely collapsed. A woman taking refuge in Gaza's largest hospital, Al-Shifa, told CNN that the smell of death is everywhere, due to the fuel shortage and Israeli airstrikes on the hospital. The Israeli Defense Force, IDF, claimed on Thursday that it was responding to multiple rocket launches from Lebanon into Israeli territory. Israel's Iron Dome intercepted 2 rockets fired from Lebanon, as reported by a CNN crew stationed in northern Israel. Israel and Hezbollah, an Iran-backed armed group that dominates southern Lebanon, have been engaged in daily cross-border exchanges of fire since the start of the conflict between Israel and Hamas on October 7, raising fears that the fighting could escalate into a regional war. On Thursday, Egypt's foreign minister told CNN that a leaked document from the Israeli intelligence ministry proposing the relocation of millions of Palestinians to Egypt's Sinai Peninsula was a ludicrous proposition. A bill providing $14.3 billion in aid to Israel as it fights a war against Hamas was passed by the House of Representatives, setting up a showdown with the democratically controlled Senate. House Republican legislation has been deemed by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to be a deeply flawed proposal, and will not be considered for adoption by the Senate. Democrats are opposed to the bill because the IRS would see funding cuts and there is no provision for aid to Ukraine. U.S. President Joe Biden and his top advisors are warning Israel with growing force that it will become increasingly difficult for it to pursue its military goals in Gaza as global outcry intensifies about the scale of humanitarian suffering there. It has been made clear in recent private conversations between Vice President Joe Biden, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who left for Israel on Thursday with a message on protecting civilian lives, and the Israelis that dwindling support will have disastrous strategic consequences for Israel Defense Forces operations against Hamas. Behind the scenes, American officials are concerned that the outcry over the humanitarian suffering and civilian casualties, and calls for a ceasefire, will reach a tipping point before Israel has a chance to try to achieve its stated objective of taking out Hamas in its current operation. According to CNN sources, some of the president's closest advisors believe that it is only a matter of weeks, not months, before it becomes impossible to continue to resist calls for the United States to publicly call for a ceasefire. There has been no indication that Israel is backing off its offensive. On Thursday, the Israeli military announced that they had encircled Gaza City and were deepening their operations there. Late on Thursday night, CNN reported seeing the skies over northern Gaza lit up by flares and explosions as the bombardment grew more intense. Israeli airstrikes this week that targeted a refugee camp in northern Gaza, resulting in grim scenes of widespread destruction and deaths, according to 2 sources familiar with the matter, particularly jarred Biden and his national security team. This was something the president didn't like at all, according to one of the sources. One high-ranking administration official said, "The problem for Israel is that the criticism is getting louder, not just among their detractors, but from their best friends. Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, spokesman for the Israel Defense Forces, said the strike was meant to kill a Hamas commander who was hiding in a bunker, and that the complex's implosion may have caused the collapse of nearby buildings. Already, protests have blocked streets in western capitals and even interrupted a private fundraiser Biden attended Wednesday in Minnesota. A member of the audience yelled, "As a rabbi, I need you to call for a ceasefire right now." Biden replied by making a direct call for a cessation of hostilities. "I think we need a pause," to which the protester followed up with, "A pause means give time to get the prisoners out." Officials maintain that the president has not set any red lines for Israel. The White House has been very careful so far not to call for a ceasefire, presumably because doing so would give Hamas time to regroup and plan for future operations.